Hello and welcome to this week's special edition of NCBA's Cattleman to Cattleman. I'm Kevin Ochsner. Thanks for joining us. It's possible that this year nothing is impacting the cattle industry more than the drought. And although cooler weather and snow are setting in across much of the country, the impacts will be felt until precipitation levels change. Here's a look at the latest drought monitor tracked by the U.S. government. Parts of the southeast and the central section of the country continue to face serious drought conditions. And that's what brings us here today. What can cattlemen do in terms of cattle nutrition and alternative feeds this winter? Joining me in the studio are Dr. Dr Patterson, Executive Director of Producer Education with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Dr. Kent Tjardis, Cattle Consultant with Purina Mills, Dr. Chance Farmer, also Technical Consultant with Purina, and finally, Carrie Wickstrom. Carrie is president of Wickstrom Incorporated here in northeastern Colorado. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming to the show today.
Yeah.
You know, Dr. Patterson, let's begin by just introducing yourself to the folks. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Dr Patterson, Executive Director, Producer Education for NCBA. And my job is to get educational programs out for our producers in the United States. My background is I've been in New Mexico, Utah, Nebraska, Missouri, Montana for about 19 years, and I've been with NCBA for about 7 months.
We're glad to have you. Dr. Tjardis.
Yeah, I'm originally from Illinois, from a cattle and grain operation. I got 2 degrees at Illinois, PhD up at Michigan State, and then I was on faculty for a while at South Dakota State. I've been with Pre-Animal Nutrition now for about 5 years, out of Omaha, and I cover mainly Nebraska and into South Dakota.
Chance, you're no newcomer to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself, though.
I live in Canyon Lake, Texas, which is about 45 minutes north of San Antonio. I've been with Purina nearly 10 years now as a grass cattle consultant. I work all of Central Texas, all of South Texas, and along the Gulf Coast region into Southwest Louisiana. Mostly work with brood cow producers, but some stocker and backgrounding outfits as well. And from time to time get into some backgrounding growing yards as well. So it's been a good experience.
And Carrie, tell us a little bit about your operation up in northeastern Colorado.
I'm a 4th generation. I'm an alum of Colorado State University, and we grow wheat, corn, and millet on dry land, and then we're a stocker and feedlot operation, along with the rest of my family.
Very good, and we're all glad to have you all here this evening. We're going to ask you a bunch of questions about this topic. Dr. Patterson, I'll begin with you. The fact of the matter is, we all know nutrition has some far-reaching impact in our operation. Tell us, how do people know they have a nutritional issue?
What we do is we train people how to read body condition on those cows. You don't have to be real smart to figure out she's a thin cow, but what you got to be smart about is she's thin today. I know she's going to calve in March. How am I going to get her from a thin condition now to a moderate condition in March so I don't have problems with that cow? So body condition is the basis of a lot of what we do. And
we were talking, you've had a chance to visit with a lot of people the last 60 days. Give us an example of some of the challenges that you hear folks facing.
Well, working on a ranch in New Mexico, the calves wean beautifully, just perfect, 550, which is a nice weaning weight for those cattle. Unfortunately, the pregnancy rates on the cows was about 52%. We've got a real challenge there to get those cows turned around so they can calve again, and even to get the cows rebred. The second one is out of the Midwest. The rain was great, caused the grass to green up. Unfortunately, they'll be out of grass by Thanksgiving, and they're going to be back on a hay-based ration or some other program, maybe like corn stalks, if they can get to those, but the grass is gone for them.
Yeah. And Dr. Farmer, I guess the question is, you know, all feedstuffs are so expensive right now that it's real tempting to try to take some shortcuts and try to save yourself a few dollars here and then. What are some of the ramifications of making those kind of decisions?
Right. Well, you just heard Dr. Patterson mention some of the short-term ramifications are bad pregnancy rates, and certainly in some situations where it was bad enough, you know, you get weaning weights that aren't where they need to be. But from a long-term standpoint, you have to think about some of the fetal programming information that's out there now indicates that these heifer offspring that are in womb during these droughts, later on we have fertility issues with them. So we're looking at fertility issues 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road that we're going to have to be dealing with because of the drought that's occurred this year. The other part of that is your forage piece. If you've hammered your forage pretty tough this year, then there's a likely chance that next year it's not going to come out like it's supposed to, and that may not be a one-year deal. That may be, again, 3, 4, 5 years where you're having less forage than you had before just because of 1 year's abuse. So the cow and the forage situation can get pretty bleak when you think about the long-term ramifications of a drought.
And certainly some long-term consequences we have to consider. And Dr. Tajardis, what would you add to that?
Yeah, like Dr. Farmer said, you really got to watch your resources, your grass. And like Dr. Patterson said, one of the things that you're tempted to do is when that grass greens up to go out there and go after it. But you're better off, you know, to wait, let it build up and get some root growth and get some stores in there and recover a little bit, because down the road, if you go after that grass too early, you're going to end up spending more on supplement than if you would have just let it get, you know, basically some growth to it.
Very good. Kerry, we didn't have much rain up in our neck of the woods this summer, or frankly last spring. How did that impact your operation?
We kept our yearlings out as long as we could, but we went on CRP to try to put as many pounds on as we could and keep them out of the feed yard. But we've used all our grass, so I'm concerned about next year and how things are going to go as we look ahead. But we also tried to procure as many feed sources as we could. We bought a lot of corn stalks. I like to buy alfalfa, but corn stalks I think made more sense from an economic standpoint because we feed wet distillers, so we don't have the protein needs. But we fed wheat this past summer in the feed yard, trying to cheapen up our rations. And as we look ahead, there's frankly not a lot of good options, but we'll keep doing what we can. Beet pulp in our area out of the sugar factory, they had a good beet crop, so we're fortunate we had that resource that's priced right for our grower rations.
Very good. And we'll come back to you and ask you some questions about some of those alternative feeds in a little bit later in the show. Dr. Patterson, I want to get back to you. You mentioned body condition scores. What other tactics would you recommend for troubleshooting the specific issues a person might have in their cow herd related to nutrition?
Well, I think the things that we've got to do is, number one, let's get the body condition figured out. Number two, how much forage do I have at home? Grazing, hay, whatever. And by golly, we've got to get an analysis of it because we don't want to waste it. We want to feed just enough, but not too much. The third one that I recommend in lots of the country, got to tell me about the water. Because of the drought, the water in these ponds concentrated, a lot more salt in that water now, which can cause us problems. So body condition score, match that with forage quality and quantity, and then let's look at the water as well.
So we've done our analysis. We know we have a problem. We identify where some of our deficiencies are. Now what? Okay,
let's just say that cow's in a body condition score of 3 today. I got to get her to a 5 in March. So that's 2 body condition scores. That's about 160 pounds, give or take. Now I've got to put a program. I've got to program that cow to go from a 3 to a 5, 160 pounds. I've got 100 days, 1.6 pounds a day. It's pretty simple to do that, to get that cow turned around. And I got to tell you, we need to start now before it really gets cold. Once it gets cold, a lot of that body energy is going in to stay warm. Okay?
Great point. Dr. Farmer, what would you add?
Well, I would add this. Those are great points, and I would say that, at least in my part of the world, one of the things that producers skip over when they evaluate what kind of program they're going to get on to help fix their situation is they forget that the first question shouldn't be, what am I going to feed and how much am I going to feed? They need to step back and understand what their requirements are first, like Dr. Patterson was saying, so that they don't get themselves in a bind and come up short. And the thing that's really hard to get over sometimes is the requirement of that cow doesn't change just because we're in a drought. And so many times people want to kind of sidestep that and say, well, I'm just going to kind of get her by or halfway take care of her. Well, that'll actually put you in a worse situation because you spent money to have a skinny cow at the end of the day, and you don't want to be in that spot. So if you just step back and understand, hey, here's her requirement. It's the same as it's always been. Now you can say, how much of my forage base can help me get at that? And then once you figure that out, now you can put a plan in place that gets you to where you need to be when the calves start calving in the spring. Or in my part of the world, the folks, they've calved in the fall in many places, so now they're sitting there and we have to decide what we're going to do as we go into the breeding season right about now. So either calving season, you have to make sure your program is lined out ahead of time so that you don't come up short.
Kent, what other considerations would you tell us to keep in mind as we consider how we might fulfill some of the deficiencies once we've identified them?
Well, right now, we've got a lot of poor quality forages. I mean, there's a lot of CRP hay put up, a lot of corn stalks being put up now and a little bit ago. Luckily, we had a good sized wheat crop, so a lot of guys had access to wheat straw. With all these poor forages, we can get feed into these cattle, but we got to make sure we're we're meeting the requirements. And those forages are really low in protein. And without the protein, and you feed the rumen bugs, they can't do their work. So we've got to get the protein into those to feed the bugs so that they can break down that forage, and then you can get the energy into the cow.
And a real basic question, I mean, what advice would you give people who are trying to figure out just how much hay or forage they're going to need to get through the winter?
It's going to depend on the body size of your cows, and of course up north we tend to have bigger cows. And in my area, we see the 1,300-pound cows. It takes almost 40 pounds of forage a day for these cows. And when they dry off, of course, it drops down. But you need to start figuring out, okay, how much forage am I going to need? Yeah, we can limit feed them to extent because they're looking for energy, but to do that, we need to make sure we're getting enough protein to get those bacteria to release that energy.
Well, gentlemen, this is a great beginning to our conversation, and I look forward to a few more questions.